It's done. 2026 is showing some of the worst cars in automotive history. We're going to finally start to see the page turn where most of these cars on my list of the top 9 are absolute tragedies in the automotive industry. Let's get into it now. One of the first brands that's literally destroying the car industry as we see it today is Toyota. Yes, they've built trust over the years. Most people buy Toyotas because they trust in it, the reliability, and their reputations carried them for many years. But things have been changing in the last few years. And it's not just about the fact that we're seeing this 3.4 liter V6 that's catastrophically failing in the Toyota Tundra that was replacing the old reliable 5.7. The upgraded Lexus GX as well as the late model LX 600 are all carrying the same engine and suffering the same fate. Massive, over 100,000 recalls for catastrophic engine failures where Toyota's having to replace long blocks. This trust is definitely dissipating. If you asked me 5 or 10 or 15 years ago what was the most reliable car in the market, Toyota, easily. But that answer is not the same today. I know people who work for the brand, and I can tell you right now, models like the RAV4, although they're not the most amazing vehicle, they are a solid, reputable model. But the worst part is you can't buy one right now. There's shortages. The manufacturer's not creating enough. And even if you want to walk in there and test drive one, in most cases, many dealers simply don't have a brand new demonstration RAV4 to take out for a drive because of their delivery on time method. Now, it was a great business model when there was shortages across the industry in 2020 and 2021, but the fact is Toyota continues to adopt that. They create only the number of vehicles required that are ordered. So almost any vehicle, whether it's a Camry or RAV4 or just about anything you order today, they probably don't have one on the lot, with the exception of Tundras, and who's buying those anyhow because of the catastrophic engine failures. So they're literally ruining the market. You can't just test drive a car like the good old days, where you get in there, you sniff it, you feel it, you drive it, you look around from corner to corner. The problem is a lot of these cars simply aren't there to look at. They may have one in the showroom, but in most cases you can't even test drive it because it's one of a kind. You have to wait. It would be worth it if the quality was there. But from what I see in late models, there's more issues with some of their hybrid vehicles, bad connections in some of the Camrys, recalls, backup cameras, catastrophic engine failures. It's still a solid brand, don't get me wrong. But Toyota has flipped the page and they're no longer the brand, in my own personal take and observation, the brand that they used to be. Another car brand that has blazed the trails for a lot of the junk that we see on the market today. It's Ford with their EcoBoost engines. It all started with their 2.7s, their 3-liter, 3.5-liter V6s, and they promised to provide more horsepower, more torque, and more economy than some of their outgoing V8 engines. But the consumers wanted V8 engines, and initially it didn't sell well. But then it finally caught on when Ford showed. They did cutaways, they showed them and demonstrated them at car shows, and people finally slowly got on board. With the better fuel economy and more towing capacity, these Fords started to sell. But then we started to realize a lot of this new technology came with problems. Cam phaser issues, carbon fouling problems, turbocharger replacements, wastegate issues, fuel injector issues. I mean, the list goes on and on. And now that Ford's introduced a whole new gambit of technology wrapped up into a pickup truck, which was a vehicle that was strictly intended for a versatile use, hauling goods around, working on the construction sites, they needed to be robust. Short trips, long trips, hauling heavy weight. They needed to put up with the service factor. A lot of these modern V6 turbo engines just aren't up to duty. Now, unfortunately, they've blazed the trail because Ford not only has problems with their V6s, and we've heard some of the 3 liters and the 2.7s allegedly with some of their intake valves that were cracking. There's been no shortage of recalls with potential fire issues, with other problems related to backup cameras, and the list goes on and on. But they've had other issues, of course, with some of their smaller vehicles and their little Turbo 3s that have had leaking fuel injectors. All kinds of electrical gremlins, all kinds of mechanical gremlins have unfortunately hit Ford hard. Now, the reality is they're trying to be a bit of a leader and innovator in their industry, and they kind of tend to do that. They're also one of the mainstream brands that also came up with the Mustang Mach-E with their first electric vehicle that was trying to compete directly with the Tesla Model Y. But the Mach-E suffers major depreciation. There's cooling loop issues. There's challenges with technology there too. And I know somebody as well who works in the service department of a Ford dealer, and it seems to be a problematic vehicle. It's really more about the V6 engines, how Ford's led the way. Now we're seeing V6 engines everywhere. Toyota's followed suit. We're seeing inline turbo 6s now with the Rams. They're following suit. And Chevy's sort of resisted, but they've gone with their Turbo 4 in some of their full-size trucks. In my opinion, any kind of turbos or superchargers have no right being in a full-size pickup truck. That being said, Chevy's largely stuck with their V8 engines, but they've had some problems of their own, which we'll talk in a bit. Ford has led the way for what we're seeing today. V6s in a lot of these full-size pickup trucks. And in 2026, we're starting to see more and more vehicles with smaller engines, less cylinders, bigger turbos, and in some cases made it up with the hybrid drives. Where is the industry gone? Not sure, but it's certainly not going the way that most consumers would like. There was a time, and I had it on the farm, many trucks. We were diehard loyal GM fans. We had half tons, 3/4 ton trucks. We would fill up the box with square hay bales right up way 5-10 feet above the box height or the cab height. These trucks could tolerate hard use, and honestly, they would do it day in, day out. 350 cubic inch or the 5.7 liter V8s or even the older 4.3s and the smaller trucks and the V6s were bulletproof workhorses. Even some of the old 305 cubic inch engines were pretty solid too, a little underpowered, but they would slow churn and they would last for hundreds of thousands of miles. See, but things have been changing lately. And a truck that I used to trust, and we would buy these honestly, probably every 3 or 4 years, was always a GM because we liked the products overall and they were pretty solid. What we're starting to see now are V8 engines still put out by GM that unfortunately the 5.3s are failing with their lifters because of cylinder deactivation technology, of course regulator driven. Now we're also seeing the 6.2s blowing cranks, rod bearings, and a lot of that has to do with crank polishing, too thin of an oil, the rod bearings too tight of tolerances, and now we're allegedly seeing some conversation about the third-party suppliers for some of these parts being a contributing factor. Whatever you want to say, it's a combination of a pile of different issues. And from what I can see, General Motors is not creating the engine that I was loving back in the day, a reliable engine that would last hundreds of thousands of miles, change the oil every 5 or 10,000 kilometers, and it would just keep on going forever. They just don't seem to do that anymore. They are more of a race engine. They rev higher, they pull harder, and they pull more load. But unfortunately, they're not built to last like they used to be back in the old days. And that's why I truly believe a lot of these truck manufacturers are charging 6 figures and more. To get a brand new mid-level, mid-spec, half-ton GM truck now, you're spending over six figures. And that's the gas jobbies. Try to get into an HD Denali? Yeah, you're $140,000, $150,000 Canadian dollars. These prices are getting extraordinarily out of control. And yet the quality isn't following suit. That is literally destroying the car market as we see it today. All truck manufacturers, in my opinion, are guilty of this, charging huge amounts of money for what would seem to be a mid-level truck. That being said, arguably the boxes have remained similar in size, but they've added more space in the cabs, more technology, vibrating heated seats, sunroofs, and leather and everything. So it's the technology that they're jamming in these vehicles. It's hard to find a base trim vehicle, and if they do, they put tin cap wheels on it, and of course they're just plain as Jane, and they don't spice them up at all, even to make them sellable. It's almost impossible to find something that looks good at a base trim. They just want to sell you an LT with a white body on it, and nobody wants that. It's undesirable. But they dress up the next trim levels, but you're going to have to spend $100,000 plus for that. On top of it, again, with engine issues, quality challenges, it just means that it's more insult to injury. The truck market as a whole is ruining the car industry as we know it. The next one really hits close to home because as a fan and a loyalist of BMW for many years, I started to see as a bit of a poke in the eye, a little bit of an insult to injury. When you're paying a lot of money, the prices keep jacking up. The quality sure has been improving on BMWs as of late. I mean, with the B48s, the B58s are getting better, of course, for their 4 and 6 cylinders, and even their V8s, although they're not perfect, they're much better than the earlier generations. You know, with some of the better shielding, fuel systems, turbochargers, enhancements, and updates, even the V8s are getting vastly better. But what hasn't gotten better is the fact that you've got equipment on board, modules, wiring, and yet BMW has elected to start charging subscription services on heated seats, navigation, all of these different features that are already hardwired into your car, and they want to charge you. Here's a free year's use. Now you get to pay. Why? The equipment's there. I've paid for. Why am I paying even more for equipment I already paid for? That's absolute lunacy. We're hearing John Deere's been through that and has been an insult to many farmers. I'm even hearing that many appliance manufacturers who are offering ice makers in 2027 are going to start charging a subscription fee beyond a year's use of that ice maker and water maker in your new refrigerator. This is getting out of hand in an industry as a whole. And what we're seeing is in Jeep running script or running advertisements when you pull up to a stop sign and all of a sudden it starts running advertisements on the center screen. All of these manufacturers are looking at new and creative ways to pull more money out of your pocket. Subscription services are one of the key ways, and BMW clearly seems to be blazing the trail for some of the subscription services. To me, it's just more insult to injury. We pay enough for these vehicles as it is. The expectation with that cost comes reliable transportation that should last at least 10 years and should be all-inclusive. But it's not. And BMW, thank you. Another car brand that has ruined the industry as a whole is this weird rebrand. Jaguar. Yes. You know, I was at a car show last night and I was talking to a great enthusiast. We both love the Jag F-Type. And we got to talking, and it's a disheartening conversation because he can no longer get his F-Type serviced at the local dealership. The parts are becoming harder to get, and they've essentially isolated Jaguar Land Rover Group are no longer part of the same team. It seems like Jaguar is sort of backing out and disconnecting and isolating as part of the rest of the Range Rover product line. And so that leaves a lot of these cars and owners orphaned. People that bought their cars 3, 4, 5 years ago. F-Paces, E-Paces, I-Paces, F-Types, you name it. All of these great Jags from yesteryear have now been essentially isolating the consumer. You bought your car and now you're stuck trying to fix it. How? Because Jaguar started to isolate some of the true loyalists. They wanted to get on board with something that was more hip and trendy. They wanted to create a new rebrand that they thought was going to be timed perfectly, and yet it fell flat on their face. Of course, the people that came up with that fancy design and that marketing scheme, well, they're kicking horse turds down the road now, but that doesn't change it for the brand now. The brand is pretty much ruined, underwater. And I love the F-Type with a passion. I truly believe as a standalone, it is one of the best performance cars on the market today. Their electric vehicles, the I-Pace, were not as competitive as a lot of the competition, and they were overpriced. You can buy a Tesla that does a lot better for less money. And yet, on the other hand, all of the internal combustion engines were running their course. They were taking a hiatus trying to determine what they should do next, but ultimately, it was too little too late. The brand is pretty much flailing, almost underwater, reaching for that lifeline, and yet I'm not so sure there is even a future. Jaguar has literally ruined a brand with true heritage, history, and it absolutely hurts my soul to see how good of a brand has fallen so far. Jeep. Why? Well, you saw what was happening in 2021 to 2022. All of a sudden, Stellantis decided to start jacking up their prices. They decided to go full electrification, and the former CEO decided to go all in. Recon's purely electric Jeeps. Who's buying that? Jeeps are made to go off-road in a back 40. Nobody wanted it. Even the plug-in hybrids, the 4xe Wranglers, as well as the 4xe Grand Cherokees, were both a couple of models that didn't sell well, with engine issues, potential park outdoor orders because of potential fire. The Wagoneers, brutal sales. Over 6 figures for all of those vehicles. They were sitting on lots for over a year to 2 years and nobody even cared because the Jeep loyalist just doesn't care about plug-in hybrids or plug-in or electric vehicles to begin with. They're a core fundamental blue-collar type vehicle. Like me, I love the old Jeeps, but then they got too expensive for their own good. The quality take a nosedive. Electrification destroyed them, and the quality challenges meant that you had to park your car outdoors or you had to worry about getting a next software update. Otherwise, the car would just brick. With the price escalations over 6 figures and the quality, I'm not sure where Jeep has for a future today. They've got to take a relook at the brand, maybe readjust, get back down to core brass tacks and say enough is enough. Let's get back to what the brand loyalists actually love. A true, authentic, affordable off-road vehicle. I drove Nissans many years ago. I had a 280ZX. I love that car. It was absolutely great. And then the 300ZX, and then the twin turbos, and then the 350s and the 370s. They were all great cars. And then something changed. All of a sudden, Nissan softened that up. They started pushing those products to the outside. They started really promoting more of the innovation with variable compression engines, which really are very unreliable. I mean, we're seeing 500,000 vehicles now that have serious recalls, but it's the CVT transmission that really hit them hard. With the Jatco transmission, because of a part ownership relationship, meant that they felt compelled to start utilizing those products. Yes, the CVT started failing with $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 repair bills and a 50,000 mile end of life for a lot of vehicles like the Sentras and the Ultimas and even the Rogues, meant that a lot of these cars just weren't built to last. Consumers started figuring that out and started shying away. That's why we saw significant deterioration in market share, market value, and unfortunately, they had to incentivize the sales of anything, otherwise these vehicles wouldn't move. They took a gamble and they failed. The CVTs in a lot of their cars were literally destroying the brand. Infiniti is going down with that sinking ship too, because they are the brother upscale luxury brand of Nissan, utilizing a lot of the same equipment, carrying a lot of the same problems. Yes, unfortunately, Honda, different transmission, but the CVTs hurt them for a while too, and some of the earlier Accords and some of the Civics. Not a great look for Honda either, especially when they're known as one of the most reliable manufacturers. Similar problem with Subarus. They had some problems too with the chains piling up and over-torquing and slamming and creating problems for their transmissions. And in the sake of trying to create something that was more economical, always trying to find the perfect sweet spot in the power band, all they did was create more problems for you, the consumer, the end of the road. What was wrong with a good old-fashioned torque converter automatic with a 5-speed or a 6-speed auto? Nothing. That's the problem. They just worked. Or even better, a manual gearbox. Push that part of the industry a little harder. But people were shying away. Not because they couldn't figure out how to drive a manual. We did for years. But the industry was leaning and pushing people to buy automatics, CVTs, torque converter autos, all for the sake of fuel economy. Why? Regulators were pushing this, industries. But the CVT, in my own personal opinion, has done a single huge part and it had a major impact on the deterioration of the enthusiast car and the catastrophic failure of the industry as a whole. They're buzzy, hummy, unreliable, and honestly, a transmission type that nobody really cares too much about. Now, another one that hurts me to the soul is Porsche. The 911 is legendary, and it's still legendary. I mean, it's all shown by the prices, how they keep escalating, and there's still always a buyer waiting to buy a next 911. So the 911 truly is the staple. But we also saw Porsche in general going through all kinds of problems, financial troubles, way back in the 90s, when all of a sudden they had to come up with something new. They started coming out with a new model. And it was the Cayenne that dug them out of the woodwork, as well as the Boxster. They needed something, a lower cost, entry-level sports car that Porsche enthusiasts could get their hands on. The Boxster was just that car. And the SUV with the Cayenne and later on the Macan were vehicles that would sell more to the masses and would help dig Porsche out of financial failures. But unfortunately, Porsche kept pushing their luck. In my own personal take, they created so many sub-brands, 911s, Turbos, Carreras, S's, Cabrios, Targas, Turbo S's. The list is almost dizzying how many different 911s they've created. But it's not the 911 that's the problem. They should shrink that down and create some more fundamental basics. Get back to the basics again. The bigger problem is those fundamental vehicles that were considered the cars and the SUVs that were digging them out in the first place. They've all replaced them, or they're replacing them as we speak. Macans with their little gas engines are getting swapped out for exclusively electric only. We're even hearing the 718 Boxsters and Caymans getting swapped out for electric only. But these are all going against the grain of what the true enthusiasts are looking for. That's why they're failing. On top of it now, with the Taycan, with vehicles now that are losing as much as 40-50% in as little as 2 years, enthusiasts see the writing on the wall and they're really getting shy to buy these types of vehicles. They're also extraordinarily expensive. Are they fast? Absolutely. They're amazing. I've driven them and they're absolutely breathtaking, but they're damaging to the wallet. They're really transitioning so aggressively to go towards electrification that they're sort of losing out on their core base that brought them to where they are today in the first place. Now Porsche's taken a back seat. They're starting to take another look at this and trying to reevaluate what they have to do. Simplify the 911 model lineup, maybe extending the ICE versions of the Macans and some of their Boxsters for a little bit longer. But whatever it is, Porsche is struggling. And this, to me, is showing where the industry's headed. All of these car brands that were once a great car manufacturer are now switching over to doing things that are walking away from what their loyal fan base was doing or looking for. It's a sad state of affairs. I love Porsche, and I still have a 911. I even have a Cayenne in my garage right now. Those are the older models because that was from a time when there were an authentic driving experience for a reasonable price tag. And there's another one that I think has been ruining the industry as a whole, and we're talking about Mercedes-Benz. How else do you go from creating a true loyalist type of brand with twin turbo V8s and all those big powerful V8s and V12 engines like a C63S, all of a sudden replacing that with a turbo 4 and a hybrid drive? And they justify it by saying it's faster than the outgoing V8s. Who cares? It doesn't sound that great. Nobody asked for that. Nobody wanted that. The buyers and the enthusiasts of the enthusiast brand being an AMG model, you've got to cater to that loyalist. And they decided to go against the grain and say, no, we're going to do the 4-cylinder instead. On top of it, there were some other problems. They've really watered down the brand as a whole. Mercedes is really renowned for their E-Class, their S-Class, their luxury motoring. They've also watered that down by introducing so many smaller sub-brands, the A-Class, CLA, GLA. And while I personally like those vehicles, they're kind of fun, they're kind of sprightly. Trust me, they do feel price point though. They don't feel anything like a nicely sorted E-Class or a S-Class. There's nothing like that. The only thing similar is they carry the same brand, the same badge, the 3-pointed star. But at the end of the day, with the watering down, with thinner, smaller, lightweight entry-level models, and thinning down the real quality engines, I've got to wonder, what was Mercedes thinking? But with all of that said, I'd like to hear your thoughts down below. Again, as always, please be sure to spread your honesty. Lay it on me. I can take it right there. I'd love to hear your thoughts about what you think the industry is all about and any other big losers that you think are truly destroying the car industry today. Hope to see each and every one here real soon, everybody. Talk to you then. Bye-bye.